Welcome everyone, Christine here with a deck in Broken Arrow based on the war in Ukraine and the way that war is being fought. Now this is a US deck, but you can make something similar for the Russians. Now of course you can't do a one-to-one conversion, if you will, from real life into the game because we are missing some very important things. Crucially, FPV drones. I do wonder how that would change things around if they were added into the game, but I guess we'll see going forward. So, I've already made the deck right here. Just called it Ukraine. And the key factor in this deck is going to be drones. So I've chosen to go with Airborne and with Striker Cav Regiment. And that's just really because of the drones. So, starting with your scouting drone, you have the RQ-7 Shadow. So this is not the best drone, but it's obviously fairly cheap, all things considered. So it's a cheap recon drone. Not the best radius, not the best survivability or anything like that. No weapons, but just a very cheap scout, which is going to be important for a whole bunch of different things that you can use as part of this deck. Because there are plenty of options here. But the key drones here are Predators and Grey Eagles. Quite a lot of them. The max number of these that I can bring, and this is the reason I went with Airborne and with the Striker Cav Regiment. Well, other reasons as well, artillery being one of those. But the thing about the Reaper drones, or the MK1s, regardless of what name they use, is that they have not only the recon capability, of course, which all drones have, but they have anti-tank missiles. Now, of course, there's Stinger missiles you can install on these, so if you're dealing with helicopters or you think you're going to be dealing with helicopters, there is an argument in favor of equipping Stinger missiles on these things, as opposed to just Hellfire AT missiles, especially because you can get 4 Stingers, as opposed to just 2 Hellfires. But you have 2 drones, 2 drone types, 4 of each, equipped with anti-tank missiles, though they're not the best anti-tank missiles. So you have attack drones. So maybe think of like the early stages of the Ukraine war, when Turkish drones played a major role there. Well, depends on how you want to view things. I think there were other things that were more important even back then, but still, you did certainly have that situation right then. So you do have these 2 drones, and then you have a whole bunch of things. So I've gone with scouts. Infantry scouts are pretty important, and the reason is that with infantry scouts, you can just hide them in the woods all over the place and get that kind of information. And one of the things to be said about the war in Ukraine is small groups of infantry play a critical role over there. It's not about the armored vehicles or artillery or anything like that plays the biggest role. Now, in terms of your proper infantry, you have Stingers, Troopers, Combat Engineers, TOWs. There's no Javelins, unfortunately. But TOWs, TOW 2Bs with the overfly attack. So you do have a TOW missile that has an overfly attack, so good anti-tank capability right there. Combat Engineers for close quarter combat. Then you do have regular troopers. Now these do have the javelin, but just some kind of limitation. Like there's no, what I mean about javelins, there's no dedicated javelin troop. That was kind of like my point. Like you do have the weapon squad, but I did prefer to go with TOW 2B, really, personally. It's a question of cost, right? Because these guys are just much cheaper. I think like the only dedicated anti-tank weaponry the US has is actually with cavalry scouts, but you would lose out on drone capability with that. So yeah, you do have troopers, and you do also have these on Striker ICV with javelin trophies. So you have javelins on vehicles as opposed to on troops more so. But yeah, Iron Fist, pretty solid durability. Like javelins are better, but Bradleys are better. But strikers, they're pretty solid in their own right. It would be great to be able to have Bradleys, to be sure, and it would also be more accurate, because while Ukraine does have strikers, they have actually used Bradleys far more effectively and far more often than they've used their strikers. We can see that based on all kinds of information, including vehicle destruction. Like, they've certainly used them. But then we have combat engineers with Striker ESV, Javelin Trophy. So you do have that mine clearing vehicle at front over there, but really the important thing is you do have pretty decent durability, and more importantly, you do have that anti-tank capability right there. And these guys are on foot because we can use other vehicles to move the TOWs and the heavy machine gun teams to the front from other parts. Then vehicles, I've gone with Striker ATGM. Makes perfect sense. So more TOWs, more overfly capability, more trophy. Humvee with TOWs. Again, overfly attack, kit armor, smoke pods, all that. Like, obviously, these things are not going to last in any kind of firefight, but they are very much a glass cannon unit with a lot of cannon capability on that, because don't mess with the TOW-2Bs, because in real life, they're pretty good. And then you have the M8 Thunderbolt. Now, the M8 Thunderbolt is pretty ridiculous as far as a light tank goes. Because let's consider this. It's obviously not as heavily armored as a proper main battle tank. It's a light tank, or really a medium tank if you want to be very specific in real life about that kind of situation. But what it does have, crucially, it does have a 120mm gun. So it has not the best gun in the world, but it's still a main battle tank gun that it does have on it. It's more expensive, but more importantly than that, it has Iron Fist capability on it. So not the best active protection system, not the best armor, but it's fairly cheap. So I've put 4 of these, as well as 6 anti-tank vehicles right here. I could have gone with Striker MGSs, but to be quite blunt about it, while MGSs can have a pretty solid defensive capability, they don't have a 120mm gun. The Thunderbolt does have a 120mm gun on it, and that's the reason I've chosen to go with those. I think actually the Thunderbolt might just be the best value tank in the game. Not because it's the best tank, far from it, but because it has that firepower, it has that defensive capability against missiles. It's gonna struggle in some ways against vehicles, against other tanks, but that's why you bring a combined arms group to deal with other tanks. This is more so to hunt down IFVs, especially heavily armored ones, and to just do a lot of damage and survive a lot of damage from missiles. Then we have the support capability. So I've chosen to go with Patriot pack-free MSEs over here with 8 missiles. I think going with 12 is just kind of overkill, and it would certainly increase the cost by quite a bit. Besides, let me say this much about using anti-air vehicles or anti-air defenses. You don't want to be sitting there in a location just shooting off 12 missiles in a lot of cases. Like, if you're ever in a situation where you're actually shooting 12 missiles, chances are people are, like, they're going to figure out where you are very, very quickly, and they're going to be able to destroy you very quickly. There's an argument to be made, but there's also points to consider in other respect. Then we have our trucks, transporting supplies, HMTT, LMTV, Centurion CRAM for close-in weapon support right there with this. Even armor, though I don't necessarily think the armor is worth it that much. Then you have Striker M short range air defenses, double stinger pods, on a Striker active protection on it as well. Now, if you really want to, you can actually install Hellfire missiles on it if you want to, and still have some stinger capability. Keep that in mind. because you will always have a Stinger capability on this. So if you just want some kind of anti-tank capability, that's up to you. But personally, I just prefer having this dedicated into SHORAD. It's a fairly mobile air defense unit, and the kind of air defenses we see in conflict like Ukraine, it's layered. So close-in weapon systems, short-range air defenses, long-range air defenses, they all play a role. Then we have our artillery. So we have the HIMARS because, of course, we have the HIMARS. Makes sense. Believe it or not, though, I think the MLRS systems, so if we look at artillery, this is what you do have. So you do have all kinds of different options, but obviously I've chosen to go with the HIMARS and with the long-range missiles, though there can be an argument made in favor of using cluster warheads or high explosive warheads as opposed to ballistic missiles. The reason why is not the cost factor. The cost doesn't really matter that much at all. It's rather the angle of attack. So in real life, these kind of missiles or ATACMS missiles, etc., the value they bring is their very long range. Well, in the battlefields that we have in Broken Arrow, the range, the size of the battlefield, it's not really something you would bring you would use that kind of missile for. Especially because they can be intercepted by air defenses. But then we have the Brutus. So Brutus is probably the best artillery option for the United States in the game, and that is not really an exaggeration. So it's a howitzer on a truck with guided rounds. I mean, armor package doesn't matter on this. It's relatively cheap, and those guided rounds are no joke. Especially if you give these guys some, like if you have units that can provide some kind of laser designation, and you probably do have that yourself or you bring it from an ally. But basically, if you can do laser designation, like there's a bunch of units that can provide you laser designation. That's one of the things scouts can do, one of the things predators can do right there. And laser designation on artillery rounds, just ridiculous. There's some videos out there from people that just show how ridiculous they are. Then we have Chinooks. So Chinooks, the value proposition of a Chinook, as opposed to a Black Hawk, is while they're kind of more vulnerable because they're bigger, they can just carry a lot more stuff, more troops, and even some lighter vehicles. Now, of course, you're not going to be carrying some of these heavier vehicles because they're very, very heavy, all of them, but you can carry something like Humvee. So you might have limited Humvees, but you can carry them in a Chinook. Unfortunately, there's no better transport helicopter, so something like a King Stallion would do extraordinarily well, but we'll see. Then we have the Kiowa Warrior. The reason I've chosen the Kiowa Warrior is if we look at Apache longbows, right? As an example, you might get better missile. You might get a much better helicopter with an Apache longbow, like more missiles, all that kind of stuff. But the cost goes up, and from my point of view, I would rather have multiple helicopters, even if they're not necessarily the best. Also, the way helicopters work is you don't want them to stick around all that much. In a situation, you want to go in there, fire a couple of missiles, have those missiles do stuff, and then get out. So very expensive helicopters are attack helicopters are generally not worth it. Besides, that's one of the reasons for the drones. Then we have the planes. Now, there's all kinds of options over here with respect to planes. So right here in this situation, I know this doesn't make sense for the sake of Ukraine, but we do have the F-15EX Eagle too. I'm sure Ukrainians would love to have something like this. Hell, I'm sure the Russians would love to have something like this because this damn thing is ridiculous. So what you have here are 16 air-to-air missiles that you install on an EX Eagle 2. Like, you can use the EX Eagle in multiple ways. Like, if you want to be accurate, quote-unquote, you could go with a Viper. Sure. But let me say this much. The EX Eagle 2 is probably one of the best airplanes in the game, except like an Su-57 and an F-22. I would dare say that an F-15 EX Eagle 2 for air-to-air rolls is just flat out better than an F-35. Because the number of missiles that this thing is carrying is just ridiculously good. And loiter capability. Then we have our A-10C Thunderbolt 2. Now, there's all kinds of things you can do with this, but personally, I would probably prefer to have some cluster munitions on it, a couple of Mavericks, or none at all. The problem with Mavericks is just getting that line of sight on them, and just being able to hit targets with them, so that's why I've only gone with 2 of them, though. Funnily enough, with the A-10, it's actually not the gun that's the primary weapon, it's the Maverick missiles. Then, if you really want to destroy something that stands in your path, I mean, again, you could go with F-16s, but you do have the B-1 Lancer with AGM, A6s, ALCMs. Now, there's all kinds of different missiles, but the value proposition here is you can use these to hit a lot of targets without relying on laser designation for, that kind of accuracy. So you can just spawn a B-1 Lancer and just order it to shoot certain locations, and it will from very, very far away with this. And then, yes, a C-17, though, honestly, you could just remove it. I don't personally value transport plane that much. Certainly not in the role that developers imagine it, wanted you to use it. So you could just flat remove this, maybe, get some, maybe even remove the B-1 Lancer and just get a bunch of F-16s. That's your decision. But the important things here are the drones, are the artillery options, the air defense options. Those are kind of the things that really matter and what makes this deck so worthwhile from my perspective. It's a pretty solid deck. Keep in mind, you do have shortcomings in armor vehicles specifically. Like, you do have strikers, etc., but you're not going to have a tank line of Abrams that are just going to be able to destroy everything that stands in their path. So that is the downside. And again, there is an argument in favor of using, Predator drones to hunt down helicopters if you want to. But, points. That is one factor. So, airborne snipers, by the way, with anti-material rifles. You could go with suppressed rifles, but I prefer anti-material rifles most of the time. I understand that it makes them less useful in terms of scouting capability, makes them more vulnerable, all that kind of stuff, but the amount of damage these guys can do if they get into a position to actually use these things against lighter vehicles, and there's a lot of light vehicles in the game, is not something that should be underestimated. Anyway, that's all I had to say. Questine signing out.